Have you ever seen one of these before? Or do you know what it is? If you do, post in the chat, let us know, or just have a guess. This is actually a contraption developed by a man in Florida. The idea is that it allows you to run on water. It kind of works like a human hamster wheel. His goal, his big dream for this contraption was that it was going to allow him to run all the way from Miami, Florida, to New York, the entire east coast of America, or about 1.5 times the length of New Zealand. Now, he managed to make it about 480 kilometers, or about a quarter of the way there before things went wrong, and predictably, he needed rescuing. Now, might think that sounds crazy, but here's something from the same man 5 years earlier. He obviously hadn't learned very much. And when he was rescued, this was his comment to the media: "I will show people anything you want to do, do it. Don't listen to anyone. Chase your dreams." It's inspirational. Right now, he may one day achieve his great dream of running in a human hamster wheel all the way from Miami to New York. But the story got me thinking, how many of us are equally oblivious of the hamster wheel that we are in, as we're kind of running and running as hard as we can, but we're not really ultimately going anywhere. We're kind of just floating on the ocean. Now, we've been following the teachings of this man called the Quester in the book of Ecclesiastes. He's also called the teacher, and this is one of the things that he observes about the world. He sees all of these people kind of just toiling, working away, but not really going anywhere. In Hebrew, he calls it havel, which, if you've been following the series, you'll know by now means futile or meaningless or like smoke. So, as we consider our own hopes and dreams, our callings, our visions, how might they stand up in the eyes of this teacher? I'm guessing you probably don't want to run all the way up from Miami to Florida, but you probably have a reason that you get up in the morning. There's probably something that drives you. You might call it something different. You might call it a vision or a calling, not just a dream or a goal. But there's something that's motivating you. And here's what the Quester has to say about all of our goals. He says, "I hated life." It's a good start. "Because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is havel, a chasing after the wind. I hated all things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish. Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil, into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is havel, futile, pointless, like smoke." If I was to summarize this, I'd say that he's saying that ultimately progress is an illusion. How many of you remember the bookstore Borders? Here's a photo of one of them. Post in the chat if you ever remember buying a book from there. It was one of the largest bookstore chains in the world from the 90s to the early 2000s. I remember going to the one on Queen Street as a kid. I loved it in there. It had like 3 different levels. There were so many books, and for a bookworm like me, it was like heaven. And think about how much effort, how much toil and work had gone into creating Borders, but from the founders and the CEOs who had taken over it. Imagine how much they had worked for to get it to the place that it was. In 1998, the CEO changed hands, and the world had started to change. This thing called the internet and a website called Amazon started to dominate the world. 2006 was the last year that Borders made a profit. Over the next 4 years, its income dropped by $1 billion. By 2013, the brand had completely ceased to exist. It was like it had never existed at all. If Borders was the hamster wheel, Amazon and the internet were like the Category 5 hurricane that just came in and completely tore it apart. But the same story could be said for any kind of progress in our lives. And this is what the quester is saying. He says, everything we toil for, at some point we end up losing control over it. We hand it over to someone or something else, and we no longer know what is going to happen to it. Who's to say that despite our greatest efforts, nothing that we have worked for in our lives, our whole legacy that we've built up, everything that we have worked for, the next generation, as much as Marg may be raising them well, ends up just completely undoing everything that we have worked for. Now, we may not be focused on this ideal of a legacy, but the same fundamental truth applies to any kind of progress we want to chase. Whether it's our goal for our life or our calling that we've been talking about, or it's your dream like hamster wheel man, ultimately, we're never completely in control. We typically think of these things like a ladder, where we start at the bottom as children and we spend our lives working our way step by step up this ladder until someday we've made it. It's the classic, I just want to be comfortable. I live a comfortable life. And this is what we're constantly chasing after, this comfortable life, or it's the achievements, or it's the goals, or it's the visions. And then we have made it. But the truth is, it's not really a ladder. Because if we're small enough, and the ladder's big enough, we actually have no way of telling whether it's a ladder or just another hamster wheel, sending us round and round in circles. The quester says it later like this: everyone's toil is for their mouth, yet their appetite is never satisfied. Better what the eye sees than the roving of the appetite. He's identifying one of the fundamental truths of being human, is that even when we've made it, even when we're comfortable, we always just end up working so hard to stay in that place. We're never kind of satisfied. He's not just saying that everybody's hungry all the time, which I guess is kind of true for me, but he's saying we're never satisfied. There's always more we can achieve. There's always a higher state of enlightenment, more money that we can spend, or more money that we need in order to maintain the kind of lifestyle that we want to live. We will never escape the toil, because the truth is, progress is an insatiable appetite. We live in a busy and anxious world, and it's rooted in this appetite for progress. We read this again. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their day's work is grief and pain. Even at night their minds do not rest. This too is havel, futile. Doesn't that describe our generation? I mean, these words are thousands of years old, but they still seem to describe our lives so perfectly. It's because this isn't something new. The overwhelming stress and busyness of life have always existed. They just looked different for different generations. These days, it even starts in high school as you get internals, and then there's music lessons, sport practices, rehearsals, all of these things fighting for your time. But then the next step, it's university, and you're drowning in assignments, cramming for exams, and then it's full-time work. Then it's marriage and the extra work of a relationship and more family to explore, and then it's a family of your own. And suddenly you're a part-time taxi driver on top of everything else, carting your children all around the city. I mean, it's exhausting and stressful just kind of thinking about it. When the sum of our lives is always kind of working our way, trying to get up to the next stage of the ladder, it's always going to be exhausting. And this is something that I think the last year and a half has kind of shown to some people. This ideal of progress is never going to be something that satisfies us. The hurricane of COVID-19 came in and pushed us way off course. I was watching a video on YouTube from a YouTuber. It was the classic, 30th birthday vlog. And he was reflecting on the year, and he said this: I don't really feel 30 because the last year has just been like a non-year. Nothing really happened. I'm still 29. In lockdown, it was like life was on pause, and it forced us to reflect on our dreams and aspirations. Some of us realized we're not really going anywhere. We're kind of running as hard as we can in our hamster wheels. And we saw it in the way that so many people up and left their jobs, moving to somewhere else, exploring more fulfillment, another way of life. But the truth is, most of us just swapped one hamster wheel for another. Last year, I came on full-time as discipleship pastor, and I started with so much enthusiasm and excitement for what I could see happen in this place. All of the progress that we could make in our groups, in our community, in our services. And then lockdown happened. And then another lockdown and another lockdown. And now we made some progress in some of these areas, but it was nothing like what I'd hoped for as I idealistically came in to this role. And it was so easy for me to just feel a deep sense of insufficiency, feeling like I just needed to have worked harder, to do more, or to just be better. And so as I come to these verses, it helps me realize that as long as I'm focusing on the progress, on the end goal, on where I want to be, this is how I'll always feel. I always end up just feeling burned out, insufficient, unsatisfied. So how should we respond? Well, this is what the quester suggests, and it's a good one. He says, a person could do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. It sounds pretty good. What he's saying is, enjoy the step you're on. But I want you to notice something. He doesn't say eat, drink, and find satisfaction in achieving your goals. But eat, drink, and find satisfaction in your toil. Because if you're not satisfied in the toil and the labor and the work, you'll never be satisfied. Now, I'm one of those really annoying people. I'm sorry to break this to you, but I can eat as much as I like and I don't gain weight. Now, I'm told that it won't last forever, but when I was a teenager, I discovered the key to happiness. It was potatoes. You see, I could eat endless quantities of potatoes. I would just go through them like nothing else. And it was a nightmare for my parents. Like, they would buy these huge bags, 10-kilo bags of potatoes, and we'd go through them in a matter of days. But I discovered this kind of state that I could get into where I would be like full to bursting of potatoes. And you know when you're full. But somehow I just still wanted more. I felt like I could just cram in one more potato. Pursuing our deepest desires, our deepest goals, is like me pursuing being satisfied with the quantity of potatoes I could get. It's almost like we could always just feel like we could fit in one more. The same applies for anything in our lives. If we're never quite satisfied with where we're at, with what we're doing, we'll never really be satisfied. It's easy for me to look at my past and to see all of the mistakes, see all of the places where I could have worked harder. And it's easy for me to keep looking to the future about the stage of life that I want to get to, the things that I want to achieve, and just kind of get stressed out about how I'm going to make it, how I'm going to get there. But if I'm not satisfied in the toil, if I'm not satisfied in the work, I'll never be satisfied. Jonathan spoke to us a couple of weeks ago about recognizing the season that you're in and living appropriately to that season. And part of this is being satisfied with the toil in the season that we're in. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. As hard as the last year and a half have been for my ministry, I have so much there to be grateful for. I have an incredible and amazingly reliable team in my Alpha ministry. This is our ministry which helps people to explore faith, to explore a relationship with Jesus. And I could focus on my need for more helpers. We always need more helpers for our discussion time in the kitchen. We need a tech person, and yes, I'm dropping hints in case you hadn't realized. But even if I got all of the help that I needed right now, there would always be something else. There would be always something more that I would need. You see, there are always going to be struggles, but it's also important to realize that there are always going to be things to celebrate. What is it that you can be doing to celebrate the things that you're going through right now? No matter what the season it is, what can you do to celebrate and enjoy the toil? But the quester is saying something even deeper with this. He goes on, talking about this satisfaction and finding satisfaction in the toil. He says this is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the person that pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. What he's saying is our fulfillment is from the hand of God. The quester says, to the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. It comes from God. But you may be asking, who is the person that pleases God? Well, the simple answer is that this was revealed to us in Jesus. This is what Jesus said about himself while he was here on earth. Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man, that's another name for Jesus, will give you. For on him, God the Father has placed the seal of his approval. Then they asked him, what must we do to do the works God requires? Jesus answered, the work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent. You see, what Jesus is saying is he is the one who has received God's seal of approval. In the words of the quester, he is the one in whom God is pleased. So if we want to receive wisdom, knowledge, and happiness, since Jesus has come to earth, it is not about the works we do, it's about drawing near to him and accepting him into our lives. So what we're seeing here is Jesus is the fulfillment that we all need. Our greatest need is to come to him. The quester identified we will never actually be satisfied with what we have. He's saying on the one hand, we should try to be satisfied with the stage that we're in, to recognize that season and to find the things to celebrate. But he's also saying, for some reason, there's just something about us which will always feel a little bit empty. He's saying, without God, who can eat or find enjoyment? Imagine how he would have responded knowing that we could invite the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God, into our hearts. To have a close personal relationship with God, to be led by him and strengthened by him every single day. I think for him it would bring a new meaning to his understanding that provision, wisdom, and fulfillment come from God. I think he would completely rethink his understanding of work and toil and his relationship with God. You see, they're not separate things. There's no line between faith and work. You see, our work should simply be an expression or the fruit of our relationship with God. You see, this is something that I think as followers of Jesus as well, we tend to forget this, or we don't fully grasp what this means. We're like these people who are asking, what must we do to do the work that God requires? It's natural, isn't it? We want to achieve something. We want to see progress. We want to have some kind of goal that we're working towards. And it's hard because God does give us callings. He does have work for us to do. He does have visions for your lives. But the thing is, what happens is we see these callings and these visions, and we start to put everything into achieving that goal, that vision. But we can get in such a hurry to get there that we end up leaving Jesus behind. And when we do this, it feels like there's no end to the work. Again, we feel like we could always just be doing more, working harder, and we end up still feeling empty. We still feel like we are just drained and exhausted. You're running on empty because you've left behind the power source, the very motivation and the inspiration behind your calling in the first place. And so what Jesus wants you to know is that he has done the work. He has done the work to please God, which means the work of God is this, to believe in him. So if you're exhausted, he will bring you rest. If you feel like a failure, he gives you the seal of approval which he received from his Father. And if you feel overwhelmed and out of control, he says, trust me. The work is in my hands. Some of the people who have the strongest faith that I know are the people who serve on our Alpha ministry. They give up every Tuesday evening during the school term and 4 weekends a year. Now that may sound like toil to you, but it's not toil to them. To them, it is work that brings them closer to Jesus. As they share their own relationship with Jesus with others, as they get to see other people exploring this relationship and discovering Jesus for themselves. At the end of 2020, Sarah, our Alpha worship leader, was diagnosed with stage 4 terminal cancer. To make matters worse, she responded badly to the treatment. Without the treatment, she only had months to live, and things were honestly looking pretty bleak. When she'd recovered and she was returning home from hospital and contemplating what the next steps of her life were going to look like with fortnightly treatments of chemotherapy, and she had no idea how she was going to be responding to those, she reached out to me and said she wanted to catch up to talk about things. And I was pretty sure I knew what was coming. I'd seen this before, life is getting tough, it's getting busy, my things are getting filled up, and I think I just need to pull back for a bit. I think we need to talk about finding someone else to continue the work that I've been doing. And sure enough, when we met, Alpha started to come up. But what she said was not something that I was prepared for. She said this, Peter, that's her husband, Peter and I have prayed about what we want for this time. We want to continue to serve the Lord and be a testimony to others. Would it be okay if I still lead worship at Alpha? I was blown away. Far from pulling back, Sarah's greatest concern was that I wouldn't let her serve on Alpha. Despite the fortnightly chemotherapy and having bad reactions on it to make things worse, she was worried that she wouldn't be able to continue to serve on Alpha, to give up her Tuesdays. I had come into the conversation anxious and stressed about the extra work that I was going to have to do. I was focused on the extra effort that was going to be required and the toil for me to be able to make progress in this ministry. And then here was this woman who was going through one of the hardest trials that anyone could go through. And she was asking if she could still serve the Lord. But if I had stopped to think about it, I shouldn't really have been surprised. Because with Sarah, the priority had never been about the progress or the results. Sarah's priority had always been growing closer to Jesus. Serving on Alpha week in and week out, it wasn't a volunteer position that needed to be filled. It wasn't just work that needed to be done, it was an expression of her relationship with Jesus as she shared the love that she received from him with others. And you know what? This year she hasn't missed a single Tuesday evening. There was one time where she was even hospitalized over the weekend, and she was there in her bed, air guitar practicing the chords that she needed for the following Tuesday. And sure enough, she was there singing praise as though nothing had happened. I'm not saying it's been smooth sailing. I'm not saying it's been easy for her and Peter. I'm sure this has been a trial like no other, and I can't imagine what this year has been like for them. But what I want you to see is that because her work was the result of her closeness with Jesus, her work became something that drew her closer and closer to Jesus. It was the very strength upon which she relied. And so it meant that when difficulties came, no matter what the enemy decided to throw against her, it was never going to overpower her. So this is why we must never forget that our greatest calling is to come to Jesus and to draw closer to him. Is this true in your life? Or have you become so distracted with your calling or living out your dreams that you've forgotten that all of your work ultimately comes out of your relationship with Jesus? What are you doing to make sure that your highest calling is not chasing your dreams, but growing closer to Jesus? Maybe you've never known this love. Maybe you've never known this fulfillment that comes as we draw near to Jesus. Maybe you're just left with an emptiness at the moment. I encourage you, draw near to Jesus. Our greatest need is to come to Jesus. And our highest calling is to draw closer to him. Wherever we're at on this journey, whatever stage we're in, I think we all need a fresh outpouring of the Spirit in our lives. I'm going to pray in a moment, and if that's what you need, if you've been distracted or if you've just been left feeling empty, I encourage you to pray along with me as we invite Jesus to come into our lives once again and to fill us and to help us understand the fulfillment that comes when we draw near to him. Let us pray together. Heavenly Father, I am so good at chasing after goals and dreams that are just empty promises. I hunger for more from life. And I realize that only you can satisfy that hunger. Jesus, please come into my life. Fill me with your Spirit. Help me to always make drawing closer to you my number one priority. I pray this in your name.
Set to Jesus now. All to Jesus now. Holding nothing back. Holding nothing back. All to Jesus. All to Jesus now. All Jesus. All to Jesus now. Holding nothing back. Holding nothing back. I surrender. I surrender. I surrender. I surrender. Here I am, God, arms wide open, pouring out my life, gracefully broken. Here I am, God, arms wide open, pouring out my life, gracefully broken. Here I am, God's arms wide open. Find us here, pouring out my life, gracefully broken. Here I am, God, arms wide open, pouring out.